How are you this morning? Good. I'm alive. I'm good. It's good. I don't know how well you'll be after I finish with you. Hopefully you'll be encouraged. You'll be strengthened. I'm going to take us to a little book in the Old Testament. And I learned from the American pronunciation, so if you've got it some other way, well, you'll just have to, that's too bad. You know, I'm gonna call him Habakkuk, all right? Habakkuk. Anybody know where Habakkuk is? You ever heard of the minor prophets? You ever heard? Okay, minor prophets. It's number 8 of the minor prophets. He's eight places along. So if you back up from Malachi, which is the 12th, and go back 4, you come to Habakkuk, all right? So that's where he's located, and that's where we're going to go, and we're going to talk about it. And what I want to do today is I want to try to draw some things out I think we need to hear in our present moment. This is a now word about where we're at, what kind of a perspective, and just offer you some perspective of some things in relationship to what's happening, what's going on. So I'm going to talk about Habakkuk, but in reality, in truth, we're talking about us. Put ourselves in the picture here. Habakkuk, not a lot is known about him because he doesn't give his pedigree or doesn't say what his occupation was, but it seems to that he was a Levite. Levite meaning that he was assigned to the temple and worked there in some sort of capacity. Some think that he was a musician, a songwriter, a singer. There's no proof of that, but it's just something that they sometimes attribute. There's a tradition that he might have been the son of the woman that Elisha had promised. It said a year from now you're going to have a kid. You're going to have a son. You know, she had been crying out to the Shunammite woman, and Elisha said to him, a year from now you're going to embrace a son. The word embrace is the same word for his name, Habakkuk. It means to embrace. And so they sometimes put tradition to that. We don't know. But it's interesting, it's this book, this man, that was very influential in the sense that there's a particular verse in chapter 2, verse 4, which is a phrase which we preached earlier this year, the just shall live by faith. You ever heard of that phrase? That comes from Habakkuk. The just shall live by faith. And it's quoted in Romans chapter 1, it's quoted in Galatians chapter 3, and it's quoted in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 37 and 38. This context of Habakkuk is quoted. So the New Testament writers, give credence to the inspiration of this tiny little book of 3 chapters. So Habakkuk has some things saying what he's doing is he's a prayer. He's a person, a man who prays. He's praying for his country. He's praying about his world. He's concerned about what's going on in his life. He's not just concerned with himself and what's going on in relationship to himself. He's out there. And he's got questions. You ever had questions? You ever want to go sit down and, kind of like picture God in a big armchair and you want to sit down and call him next to him and just have a good old yarn and ask him some tough questions? Well, that's what Habakkuk does. He's, even though it's a vision, in the vision, he's having a dialogue. He's having an exchange. He's talking to Yahweh. He's talking to Jehovah. He's talking to him. And he's laying out, in a sense, a complaint. You ever complained? I know better. I know some of you. I know me. We've had a few complaints. But the complaint department here in Habakkuk is not a complaint like, God, you're just not doing your job. It's kind of like, you want to tell God, you're not doing something here. You're letting down. There's things happening here. Where are you? It's more of the question, God, I need to understand. I'm so limited from what I'm seeing. And from my perspective, it looks like this, but God, can you help me here? I need to see something. I need to see it the way you see it. That's Habakkuk. So he lays out a complaint, basically, about the nation, about what he sees in the nation. And He's letting out about the injustice. Primarily his cry is about injustice. There's such injustice. There's such corruption. There's such lying and thieving and elements going on. It just seems like it's unarrested. It just seems like it's just totally out of control. And it just seems like, God, from my perspective, it just doesn't. Where are you, God? Where are you? So verse 5, God answers him. And we read that. It says, the Lord's replied. Look around at the nations. Look and be amazed. For I'm doing something in your own day, something you wouldn't believe, even if someone told you about it. Verse 6, he just simply says, I am raising up the Babylonians. Well, right there would blow all the circuitry in that Jewish man's mind, because it's almost unthinkable that God would be involved with the Babylonians, the most idolatrous, the most evil, the most hated, the most ungodly. You could just keep going, all sorts of adjectives to describe Babylon. And it would just be unthinkable. It'd be like the worst that we could ever think about in terms of regime. When I was growing up, it was the Russians. How could God ever, that God-forsaken the Russians? Of course, as Americans, in the Cold War and everything like that, they were the baddies. So we kind of grew up in our cultural understanding like that was the ultimate of evil representing the earth was Russia. How could God? And yet God was totally at work, and God was totally working in and doing different things and such. So the essence of what God was saying in verse 5 was he's saying, Habakkuk, I'll give you my perspective, but if you need to come with me, and we've got to go from here to here. We've got to go from this perspective, you see, because what I'm doing that may be related to your personal questions about the things that are on your heart in relationship to your own nation and your own people and your own perspective, it's not that they're unimportant, but they're not divorced from a far bigger picture. In other words, he says, I want to take you to the world stage. You have to look out among the nations to start to get accurate or get an understanding of what I am doing in your smaller picture. Your smaller picture is this, and it's not unimportant to me, but I'm doing something huge in the nations. He said, it's amazing. He says, I'm actually raising up the Babylonians, and the Babylonians are actually going to do my instrument. They're going to be the instrument of my punishment. He's going to be the ones that I'm going to try to goad. I'm going to try to do everything I can to turn Israel back to me, and yet all the accumulative hundreds and hundreds of years of rebellion and various other things that have been accumulating. I'm going to use the Babylonians to be my instrument of correction and certain things with my people. So you have to understand it's this. So Habakkuk says, okay, I'll accept that. Now, there's something else I want to talk to you about. God, just bear with me, God, but well, how are you going to deal with the Babylonians then? Are you going to deal with them? All right, God, you're going to use them to do this. I get that. But what about dealing with them? And he says, now watch what I do with them. Even though they're going to be my instruments, I'm not ignorant in regards to what they are and who they are, their weapons of war, their mass destructions, all the various things that they do, their methodology, their boasting, their God is their own strength. I'm not unaware of those things. I'm aware of them all and then some. Things that you don't know about, I know about, and I will deal with them in my time accordingly. Oh. So you come to chapter 2. That's just chapter 1, kind of in a nutshell. Chapter 2, he comes up and he says, and I love this because this is where I want to start to position us, because I think we need to be in this kind of position as the Church of Jesus Christ in our nation, our country, our land. He says, I will climb up to my watchtower and stand at my guard post. There I will wait to see what the Lord says and how he will answer my complaint. Wow. You see, I'm convinced it's okay to ask him, but how many of us are willing to posture ourselves in a place where we're willing to wait for the answer? It may not come like that. It'll come, But it may not come like that. I had a conversation with Linda. Linda, I not want to just point out, but Linda was wrestling with all the ins and outs of various things in relationship to unanswered, seemingly unanswered prayer in relationship to her daughter. And yesterday she, in a moment, shared with me a process that God had brought her to. These questions. And not to say she doesn't have more questions, because I know her well enough to know she's got more questions. But the ultimate question of certain things in relationship to a healing question, and why she saw that God answered her. I am a healer. I do answer prayer. I do various things. But in this one particular situation, she saw that Father God stepped in to this specific situation and took her home. And it settled her heart. She says, okay, I get that. I understand that. God's perspective is so needed right now, is what I'm saying. Habakkuk knew that the nation and certain situations, and that his faith, because that's what the whole theme, the underlying theme is about his faith. His faith was at stake. His ability to do what he was called to do, but not just on the calling side, but in his everyday living side. He needed clarity and understanding. He needed godly perspective so that he could represent God well in the midst of a generation that was getting more crooked by the moment, deviating and going way off course more and more and more. He was in a culture that once knew God but was far from God. He was in a culture that had been built around a religious sort of thing of training and equipping, and if we would put it in our day, Sunday school and teachings and, church attendance and various other things that once were part and parcel of what we would consider being New Zealand. Gone far away from that. Far away. And I'm really not an advocate that we return to a religious thing or to a situation where we become something where we're external, but internally no different. I'm not advocating that at all, because I don't think that's what God was advocating. It might make for a more peaceful society. It might have the appearance of being godly and various things, and we rejoice in it. But in terms of life change, in terms of absolute life change and transformational change, and really knowing God, there's a big difference between the externals and the internals of knowing Him. So Habakkuk is a man that prays, and he carries the nation, he carries concerns, he carries trying to figure out why and what and how and various things. And so God says, you look among the nations, and then he begins to share with them. And then hear what he says specifically starting in verse 2, and we'll read through to verse 4. It says here, "Write my answer plainly on tablets, so that a runner can carry the correct message to others. This vision is for a future time. It describes the end, and it will be fulfilled. If it seems slow in coming, wait patiently, for it will surely take place. It will not be delayed. Look at the proud. They trust in themselves, and their lives are crooked. But the righteous will live by their faithfulness to God." What I see here are a number of things, and I will draw some things out here just in the way of practical application and such. But what I see here that is important for us, at least important for me to get, dare I say, is that if there was ever a time we need to be clear about certain things, it's now. Not be confused about who our faith and ultimate trust in. If that has not been settled, friend, you need to settle it once and for all. Who is Lord of your life? Are you in charge, or is Jesus Christ Lord? Get clarity on that. Get it decided once and for all. Because what's happening is that what's ahead of us and what's coming into our nation is moment by moment creeping closer and closer, where you will have to stand up and be counted for being a Christ follower in this country. It's coming down the pike. It's ahead of us. Right now, we can play in a sense, come to a building like this and be under no threat. We can come to a place like this, and we're not going to have placards out there on the street calling us bigoted, calling us all sorts of things. But friend, that day may come where it may cost you dearly and deeply for you to be counted as being a follower of Christ in God's zone called New Zealand. And you don't wait to that moment to get clarity. You take moments now when the Spirit is giving and offering you opportunity now to get clear, to get it settled, to get clear about what your value system is, to get clear about what it is that counts most in life in relationship to eternity. Don't wait, friend. Don't wait until it's upon you and then you say, oh, I'll wait until then I'll get it right. It's like the sinner who says, I'll wait to receive Christ until sometime later, but now I want to live and experience, and I want to get out and have some fun, and I want to go this and this and this and this, and I want to have some fun, and then sow my wild oats, and then I'll come to God and let God heal me up, clean me up, and do all that sort of thing, not knowing how much that excursion will cost. When the Spirit is saying, now, do it now, so that you'll be ready to give an answer for the hope that lies within you with clarity, not with confusion, not with emotions all over the place, but with a settled faith that knows, not just high hope, and I just think and I believe, but I love the Scriptures when it comes and says, and we know. Yesterday at the funeral, the front page of this little flyer, we put on Romans 8:28. In the first words of that particular verse, which is a famous verse for all Christians, we know that God causes all things to work together for good to them who are called by God and who love God and who are called according to His purpose. But it's the first two words, we know. Not we hope, or we believe, or we think. That means if there's an area in your life that's out of control, find the grace of God to arrest it, pull it in, and make it subject to the obedience of Christ. If there are thoughts in your head that are just go off, that are negative, then get help. Do whatever's needed. There's grace in this moment now from the Holy Spirit for the people of God to do certain things, to get things changed, to get things right, so that when the vision comes, it's appointed. It will come. Surely it will come. It's not right now, but it's coming. So he says, write it down. Make it plain. Get it clear. Get it right. Get it committed to memory. Get it where it's clear so that you'll know it, but also others can take what you're on about. Take the vision, can take the gospel, can take the message of Christ, can take the things that are incredibly important in light of eternity and run with it with clarity and not confusion. There's so much blooming confusion in the body of Christ. Emphasis on this and emphasis on that, and grace this and faith this and this teaching and that teaching and emphasis teaching, and just a smorgasbord of a whole bunch of other stuff. You know what? I've stopped reading a lot of stuff. I've stopped searching a lot of stuff. I've stopped listening to a whole bunch of things. I've turned the television off in relationship to all sorts of TV programming from Christian TV. I've taken and shut out as much as I possibly can because the phone says, I don't need confusion, I need clarity. And so do you. And clarity doesn't come from a whole lot of confused voices. Clarity comes when he says, I'm going to climb up into my watch place. I'm going to climb up into a place that I've marked out and carved out with God. It's a secret place. I don't know where yours is. It might be driving your car. I don't know. It might be an office place in your home. It might be a walk along the beach. But there's a place where you and God meet. Take that. Carve out time for it. And get before God. And wait for His answers to your questions that need to be clarified with His perspective. And allow Him to put it in the context of a far bigger picture than yourself. So you can see who you are in relationship to this. Because God's way is that He says, you hold a key, you're a key holder, you're a stakeholder, you're very important to me, but it's not all about you, honey. It's about a far bigger picture here that you're important to help seeing this get fulfilled. Does that make sense? Habakkuk. So we need to learn to wait for God. We need to learn to be clear about what it is that God shows us. That's what verse 2 of chapter 2 says. We need to learn to share with others and clearly communicate. Practice now, practice now, practice now. Learn how to share the gospel. Learn how to take your testimony and put it down into a 2-minute time frame. Can you do that? This is what I was before Christ. This is how I received Christ. And this is what God's done after I received Him. A 3-part testimony. Before Christ, receiving Christ, after Christ. Do it in 2 minutes or less. It might lead someone into an everlasting eternity with Christ. Your testimony. Clarity. We need to learn to be patient. Because He says it's an appointed time. It will happen. Surely will happen. But it's not going to happen like that. That's what He's saying. It will surely take place. It's not going to be delayed. It seems slow in coming, but wait patiently. Wow. So here's this Habakkuk fella. Paul derives clarity from him. His clarity by writing it down. His clarity in relationship to this process that he's wrestling with God, trying to get clarity, trying to understand the day that he's in, trying to understand his own nation, trying to understand the nations of the world, trying to gain clarity in all of this. It's Paul who then uses it in Romans, in Galatians, and then the writer of Hebrews to then be able to bring clarity to a whole bunch of people, Jews and non-Jewish, about their faith. Faith. The just shall live by faith. It was that one little phrase that in 1517, a priest in the Catholic Church stood up to the Catholic Church and began to declare and decree that salvation was not based upon church rules, regulations, rituals, or anything else. It was back to the Word of God and say that the just shall live by faith, and took and nailed on a door in Wittenberg, Germany, I think it's 95 different papers on just that one scripture, based upon the just shall live by faith. And we call it the Reformation. It unleashed something that has started a revolution element that still continues to this day. A return back to the freedoms and the liberty that the just shall live by faith brings. The last thing we need to learn out of this little, before we move on, is that we need to learn to value faith. To value faith. Pastor Linda made reference to it today, and she quoted virtually 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 7, where it says that our faith being more important, our faith being more precious than gold itself. Gold in the world markets, measured by the U.S. dollar, is $1,500 and something per ounce. You ever seen an ounce of gold? It's not very big, but it's $1,500. It's quite valuable, wouldn't you say? And God says your faith is far more valuable than gold. It's more precious than gold. It's material. And so He said it's so precious, this is what He does. He says it gets tested with fire. He doesn't use water. He doesn't use the cool products. He doesn't use the sort of things that make us feel all good and nice and mushy and mercy and compassion and stuff like that. He uses fire. Trials, testings. He takes you to the brink without pushing you over. That's His promise out of Corinthians, where He says you will not suffer a temptation. That's not, first of all, common to everybody. But God Himself will provide a way out, or a way of escape out of the temptation. God's motive in tempting is not to tempt you. And God says in James that He tempts no one. But He will test you. What He will test you, He will test His work in you. He will test your faith. Because it's more precious to him from his perspective more than gold. Is this helping anybody? Well, that's good. I wouldn't know it by watching you guys. I remind myself often, it's a compliment, David, when Kiwis are quiet and they sit there and they're thinking. Yeah. Their wheels are spinning. Not as crazy people. That's just your wheels are spinning. Yeah. Learn to value your faith. Learn to value your faith. When was the last time you really thought about how valuable your faith is? Because, friends, the contradictions of life are not going to go smaller, they're going to grow larger. What I mean by that is that this morning as we were waiting before the Lord in worship in the first service, there were several that received prophetic words, and one particular man came up and shared it, and we had him facilitate a time where he shared what he saw. And he saw a river, and he saw that the river was a placid type of river where it was just kind of moving along. And this boat was in the river, and it was going at the pace of the river. It was just being taken along with the river. But the river was starting to gain rapidness. It was starting to increase in its speed as it began to move into a more rapid, into a descending type of arena. And he said the boat, which represented the church, and the river represented the world in the direction it was going, God was saying to the church, you have a choice to make now. You can take and just stay up and keep in the current and let it be sweeping along in its descending form, or you can turn your boat around and go upriver and go against the grain and go against the spirit of the age and be willing to take what may come as a result of being that you might have to stand up with courage and confront something in your work situation and say, I don't agree with that. It may cost you your job. You may have to stand up on behalf of Christ, not in an offensive way, not in some ugly Bible-bashing way, but in a speaking the truth in love way, declare something that I don't agree with. I don't think that is the right thing. You may not be a theologian. You may not be able to quote great chunks of Scripture, but you may, from a deep set of settled conviction, because you've paid the hard yards of waiting before God and allowing Him to clarify even confusing things to you in these moments, that you may then be able to stand up with clarity and say, I don't agree with that because of this. I value life. I don't agree with euthanasia because I believe in the Creator who created all things, and He values life. He doesn't value death. He doesn't value someone else standing in His place of sovereignty. He doesn't value that. He values life and the freedom of choice given all the way to the end, and not people playing God. That's just one that's increasing. This past week, it was, of course, the homosexual redefinition of marriage. It goes totally against the grain of our Father who created all things, what He created in His order of things. Cuts right, it destroys. Why is it so horrible? Because it mars the image of God. The image of God is male and female. He created them in His image. And it's that which fundamentally undermines the image of God in a society, in a culture, and begins to call it normal when, friends, it's not normal, it's abnormal. You may be a homosexual here to here, and you may find what I'm saying offensive. Friends, I'm not doing it to offend you, but I at the same time, with clarity, say I must stand in relationship to my Creator, in relationship to God's Word, in relationship to it, not as a rejection of you, but as a stance in love to the one I love far more than you. It's that kind of thing where we're coming to. More and more. And Habakkuk was in one of those places because this was a culture that was descending rapidly, as in a sense of a river, a tide away from God. And he, of course, was like many prophets that were raised up as truth tellers to speak certain things, to declare certain things. And yet in this little letter, there's a personal side where he's wrestling privately and he's writing it down. This is what I'm wrestling with, God. I don't understand this injustice and these situations and that's happening and the courts this and it seems so out of whack and this seems so unfair and then yet this is happening over here that's good, but then over here we do the total opposite. We kill and abort our babies, and yet when somebody does something, a parent may smack their child, we'll throw the book and the law at them as if they were totally abusing kids, and yet we'll kill them and murder them. Something is not right in the equality of justice scales. And so the cry coming out of Habakkuk, you're paying attention, aren't you? Habakkuk. It's him. He's going, oh, God, are you doing anything about this? Come here, boy. Let me show you. Let me put you on a world stage. And what's God doing among the nations? He's shaking it. He's shaking the religious institutions. 600 years since a pope resigned. He's shaking queens and kings. The Queen of the Netherlands abdicating early for no apparent reason. He's shaking governments and political institutions and everything else. He's shaking the nations. Not because he's venting anger. It's more like, I'm shaking you to give you an opportunity to get free from the entanglements of this world and to get in touch with my world. So Habakkuk starts to come to some perspective here. Look at chapter 2, verse 14. For as the waters fill the sea, the earth will be filled with an awareness of the glory of the Lord. In spite of what you see, Habakkuk, in spite of this, he receives that sense and that direction from the Lord's heart, and he begins to declare it. He says, and what he's doing is he's reaching back to Numbers chapter 14, where God, in the face of the most incredible unbelief, where 10 spies bring a negative report, 2 bring a positive report, a righteous report, and the vast majority of the nation vote with the 10, and God has to sentence them and judge that and put consequences to that. And then in the face of that, he stands up and he says, now, you've made your choice, I've made mine. And as surely as I live, all the earth is going to be filled with the glory of the Lord. No matter what you've done, in spite of what you've chosen, in spite of what you've decided here, you need to know someone there. There's someone from eternity that will outlast this decision and will go to work at bringing good in spite of that and will make it happen anyway. All the earth is going to be filled with the glory of the Lord. Habakkuk reaches in and gets that. There's going to come an awareness of the glory of God in spite of all this. Now, let's finish this. Habakkuk 3. The last chapter is a prayer. It's a psalm. It's music. And he comes to the very end of it. And how is he going to summarize this? And how am I going to finish this off? Well, I can't find any better words than his own. And let me read them to you. Starting in verse 16, the second half, he says, I will wait patiently for the coming day when disaster will strike the people who invade us. He knows it's coming. He's received the answer from the Lord that he was inquiring about, and he's aligned himself to it and such. Now he postures his own heart. And this is where you need to be today. Maybe you can adopt these words for yourself. In this present world that we're living in his day, he's saying, even though the fig trees have no blossoms, and there are no grapes on the vines, and even though the olive crop fails, and the fields lie empty and barren, and even though flocks die in the fields, and the cattle barns are empty, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. The sovereign Lord is my strength. Would the worship team come? The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes me as sure-footed as a deer, able to tread upon the heights. There's a big picture. And as he looks even in the national side of things, he sees drought. He sees horticultural disasters. He sees economic factors called the barns. We call them banks. They call them barns. And they're empty. Your bank account may be empty. You might just be having enough of a trickle to feed your family and pay a bill or two. That may be your condition. He says, whatever it is, after all the querying, all the questions, all the various things, seeing the bigger picture, now he starts to say, okay, I have a decision to make. I have a democratic vote in this. I'm going to rejoice in the Lord. I'm going to joy in the God of my salvation. I'm going to recognize there's a sovereignty in this element of God that I need to grow in my understanding of. I recognize that what he's focused on me individually is he's out to transform my walk, my feet, to become like hinds feet or deer feet or cloven feet or feet that can go up and bound from that rock to that rock and get into places and be able to walk in places and be able to do things that normally would have destroyed my faith. Instead, my faith gets stronger and stronger, and I'm able to bound over. I'm able to jump over problems like I didn't able to before. I'm able to leap from certain places that I before would destroy me, fears that used to take my mind and absolutely keep me depressed for weeks on end or even months on end, things that no longer, because he's done a transforming work. While he's doing all this in the nations, he hasn't forgot about me. He's doing a transforming work in my walk, in the everydayness of life, and changing me from the inside out. And he's enabling me to walk in a way that still I walk by faith and not by sight. In spite of, I keep going. Bounding, 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 bounding. What a potent little book called Habakkuk. Is that your choice today? I want us to sing that song. Where does my help come from? I look to you. Where does my help come from? And you begin to walk through the song, and then the words bring us to that place. Hallelujah. Our God reigns.